Okay, participants are rolling in. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Happy Black History Month. If you missed a couple of days because of the blizzard here in the Northeast, no worries at all. We will be extending Black History Month into March, and you're welcome. Hold your applause. Hold your applause. Let us not forget that Facebook was founded today, back in 2004, way back then, and is every bit the 17-year-old we would expect it to be. It shares a birthday with Rosa Parks, Dan Quayle, and boxer Oscar de la Hoya. Why? Because somebody has to. And so I welcome you one and all to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Lord, and I am delighted to be your host. I am a stand-up comedian and author, and if you are so inclined, you can find out more about me and my work at veryfunnylady.com. I'm also very pleased to share that my new Dry Bar comedy special is out, you guys. And a Dry Bar comedy special is like having an HBO special, except better because it's free. You can watch it in the Dry Bar app or on my website, again, which is veryfunnylady.com. And a few reminders before we really get going. The Center for Inquiry's Coronavirus Resource Center is still doing the work of fact-checking misinformation and sharing reliable news, which you can avail yourself of at centerforinquiry.org/coronavirus. As always, they've curated some interesting and informative articles, especially the one about the coronavirus variants, what they do and how worried we should be. And there's also one about work from home COVID scams. And you guys, I just got to say, the level of vigilance we're required to sometimes have feels exhausting. But I think it's better to know than to not. I also encourage you to subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer magazine. There are two ways to do that, which is digital and print. And the print subscription gives you access to the digital. So why wouldn't you do that? And I would really recommend, if you haven't done it already, to actually, treat yourself, because this month the front cover features an article written by tonight's guest, the bizarre Quniverse and QAnon conspiracies. So go to skepticalinquirer.org and hit that subscribe button at the top right of your screen. I am also going to just go on ahead and ask you to mark your calendars for our next Skeptical Inquirer Presents, which is on February 18th, featuring Michael Mann. He'll be talking with us about the new climate war and the fight to take back our planet. Now, everybody, if you've been here before, or if you're new here, I should say, the flow of the evening is easy, easy breezy. You keep doing whatever you're doing. I'm going to assume you're doing a great job. I'll introduce our guest. They'll fascinate and inform us, after which we'll open it up for your questions. At the bottom of your screen down there, you'll see a little icon that says Q&A, and that's the place for you to type your questions in the form of a question. And if you miss any of tonight's event, yes, it is being recorded. And yes, it will be available on skepticalinquirer.org. Okay. And I guess now we get to it. I get to introduce our guest. Our guest this evening is currently residing in Sunnyvale, California. As a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, I always want to say Sunnydale, and that would be wrong. Our guest is a researcher and a writer for the podcast, Even the Podcast is Afraid, and an occasional contributor to the podcast Southern Oddities. Her first article for Skeptical Inquirer TV Mystery Mongering was featured in the February 2014 issue, so she is no stranger to the Skeptical Inquirer family. As a reformed 9/11 truther, she possesses unique insight in the midst of conspiracists and uses this to debunk and study conspiracy theories. Her research into the QAnon cult began with writing of a two-part series for the podcast Bad News on the Doorstep and The Wheel of 4chan, which inspired her to submit two articles here to Skeptical Inquirer. And as I mentioned, that first article, The Bizarre Universe of QAnon Conspiracists, say that 3 times fast with a little bourbon in you, is indeed the cover story for the March-April issue. And her second, Human Trafficking and the Plandemic, will be featured in the May-June issue. It was because of her amazing work on these articles that she was invited to do this presentation and to help us, those of us who are thoroughly confused, wrap our minds around the origins of this destructive conspiracy theory and why we should actually take it seriously. So, speaking with us tonight about QAnon, Blood Libel for the Digital Age, please welcome Stephanie Kemmerer. And Stephanie, you have the con.
Thank you. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to have to kind of go over a few terms. The first one would be red pilling. This is the process of waking up to the reality of the world, as they call it, and it's a reference to the Matrix. So if you're not a QAnon follower, you're a blue pill sheeple, technically. And we want to distinguish between conspiracy and conspiracy theory. A conspiracy is a plot involving 2 or more people who have malicious intent. And conspiracies actually have evidentiary documents to back up their existence. For example, that would be MK Ultra, and this is one of the heavily redacted, declassified MK Ultra documents. So then there's a conspiracy theory, which is the same thing, a plot involving 2 or more people with malicious intent, but a conspiracy theory does not have the evidence to back it up. And an example of this would be the nanothermite demolition of the World Trade Center. And then there's Save the Children, which is the name of a legitimate organization, but the phrase Save the Children has been hijacked by QAnon. At first, it was to avoid ban hammers on social media. And they just kind of kept going with it. And now it's one of their catchphrases. And drops, breadcrumbs, or crumbs are Q posts. And baking is the process of decoding the crumbs. And as you see here on the screen, sometimes QAnon followers will bake tweets and other messages as well. And they really, really like numerology and gematria. And then there's the Q clock. I have no idea. That's all I could say is I know it exists, and it's just really, really confusing. And it just kind of shows an extra level of how far they're willing to take their interpretations. And digital soldiers, it's a moniker adopted from a speech given by Michael Flynn. And then there's the deep state, a body of people, usually influential members of government or the military, and they're believed to be involved in some sort of secret manipulation or control of government policy. And then we have meme wars, which is preferred ammunition and battle tactic of the digital soldiers. They like to battle people online using memes. And do your own research is a QAnon catchphrase, and it espouses the heart of the movement, which is that nothing mainstream can be trusted. Parler, Gab, and Telegram, right-wing extremist social media platforms. And it's kind of curious, if you see the logo for Gab, it's the face of a frog, which wonder if it's maybe a dog whistle to the whole Pepe thing. And then there's the Plandemic, a false narrative that COVID is a hoax. And it's also the name of a 2-part documentary series. And right here at the bottom of the screen, we see one of the biggest QAnon influencers and grifters, Joe M., talking about how the pandemic is fake. Mole children. Children kept as sex slaves in vast underground tunnels, and these tunnels are all over the world, all over the country, supposedly. Frazzle drip. is an urban legend of a snuff film found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. And this snuff film supposedly shows Huma Abedin and Hillary Clinton ripping off a child's face and wearing it. And it does not exist. WayfairGate emerged in the middle of the pandemic last year, and it was a hoax that overpriced industrial cabinets on Wayfair were really kids. And actually, one of these kids came forward, I believe it was on TikTok, and said, "Hey, I'm not missing. I'm right here. Stop using my name." And WWG1WGA, where we go one, we go all. This is the big QAnon catchphrase. And it's a line from the film White Squall. And then we have trust the plan. And that's another QAnon catchphrase. And trust the plan is also a classic example of cultish thought-stopping techniques. And here on this meme, I just kind of highlighted how they're discrediting themselves in their own meme. Use logic, think critically, think for yourself, but trust the plan. And the storm, no one knows what it is, not even Q. It's been cause of much debate. And one of their other catchphrases is the storm is upon us. And then there's the Great Awakening, which is kind of the terms that you're going to see brought up. But I also want to make sure that everyone understands QAnon should not be confused with the hacktivist group Anonymous. Some QAnon followers have been seen wearing the Guy Fawkes masks, but Anonymous does not like QAnon, not at all. So the Wheel of 4chan. The first posts from anonymous user Q Clearance Patriot appeared on the 4chan message board in October 2017. Q was claiming to be a federal official government insider with high-level Q clearance. All of the posts are cryptic and often end as a question instead of a statement, leaving them open to interpretation. Thousands of these posts have appeared over the years. The aggregator site QAnon.pub shows 4,953, and that does not include the very first posts. Q's big secret is that Hollywood and political elites are part of a secret, massive, satanic, cannibalistic pedophile ring, or pedivore, eater of children. These elites terrorize children in order to increase the production of adrenochrome, which is then harvested to prolong life. So what the heck is adrenochrome? It's a chemical compound with the molecular formula C9H9NO3. And it's produced by the oxidation of adrenaline. And even though adrenochrome induces remarkable psychoactive effects, most researchers agree that an adrenochrome experience does not necessarily qualify as a psychedelic one. And adrenochrome in pop culture. Adrenochrome is not a new thing. The whole concept has been around for a while. It was featured in a scene of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And they're taking drops of adrenochrome out of a bottle, which the one character says he got from some Satanist friends. Clockwork Orange, the book, makes mention of a street drug with a very similar name to adrenochrome. And the books Doors of Perception, Destination Void, and Discworld Sorcery all make references to adrenochrome. There was a 2017 movie called Adrenochrome, and the new metal band OTEP had a song called Adrenochrome Dreams from their 2007 album, The Ascension. And the iconic goth band, the Sisters of Mercy, did a song called Adrenochrome on their 1992 album, Some Girls Wonder by Mistake. So now the blood libel connection. What exactly is the blood libel connection. And what is the blood libel? The blood libel myth, also known as ritual murder charge, goes back to the Middle Ages. This is basically Jewish people were accused of murdering Christian children and using their blood to mix in with their Passover matzah. These blood libels have frequently led to mob violence and pogroms, and occasionally to the decimation of entire Jewish communities. The first recorded case was in 12th century England. A young boy named William was found dead, and a local monk declared that the boy had been murdered by Jewish people. Most of the townspeople didn't believe this claim, but a cult did spring up that venerated the boy. And also around this time, there was a myth that began to circulate that every year Jewish leaders around the world met to choose a country and a town from which a Christian would be apprehended and murdered. The myth became so prominent and widespread that it was common for Jewish people to be instantly blamed whenever a Christian child went missing. Some Christians were saying that Passover wine was really blood. No evidence for any of these claims has ever come out, and consuming blood is strictly prohibited in Jewish tradition, and these myths add insult to injury. There have been over 100 documented blood libels between 12th and 16th century, many resulting in the massacres of Jews. Most recently, a blood libel had occurred in Messina, New York in 1928. A young girl went missing, and a rumor spread that the Jews had kidnapped and killed her. The town's rabbi was accused, but the girl was found alive and unharmed. And the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is a fabricated anti-Semitic text that claims to describe a Jewish plan for global domination. It is a complete lie, and it was actually plagiarized from several earlier sources. First published in Russia in 1903, it was translated into multiple languages and disseminated internationally in the early part of the 20th century. The Elders of Zion book helped to further racialist rhetoric against Jewish people. In the 1920s, Henry Ford had 500,000 copies printed and distributed in America. And both the blood libel myth and the Protocols of Zion have been repeatedly debunked, yet they still continue to be touted as truth. Some people have said that when British conspiracist David Icke talks about shape-shifting reptilians or lizard people, he really means Jewish people. But in actuality, in keeping with his typical delusion, he literally does mean lizard people. And David Icke talked about adrenochrome being harvested by satanic pedophiles long before QAnon came along. And he has distanced himself from QAnon and PizzaGate, but he has also kind of encouraged them because they back up some of his claims. And here's just a screenshot of some discussions about Jewish people from Parler. Just some really scary stuff. And we have William Cooper's classic conspiracy book, Behold a Pale Horse. Chapter 15 is called Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is basically the Moby Dick of conspiracy books. And we have the Turner Diaries, fictional novel from 1978. It's about a violent revolution to overthrow the government, and it ends in a nuclear war and a race war with a focus on the destruction of Jewish and non-white people. So if Behold a Pale Horse is the Moby Dick of conspiracy books, the Turner Diaries is basically the Bible of white supremacists. And by changing blood to adrenochrome, we're updating this anti-Semitic concept for the modern era, but they're also borrowing a narrative from pre-existing concepts. In 2016, the PizzaGate conspiracy theory laid much of the specific groundwork for the narrative that would morph into QAnon. PizzaGate started with the infamous WikiLeaks Clinton email dumps. And here is PizzaGate, quote unquote, simplified. The black lines are known connections, with the red ones being speculation. And I'm just going to let this go through really quick so you can see all the little arrows as it's coming up. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. And a great deal of mental gymnastics have gone into PizzaGate and QAnon. And by mental gymnastics, we mean there's a lot of leaps and bounds required to arrive at the conclusion that any of it is true. Shortly after the WikiLeaks Clinton email dumps, we have the murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich. And wild speculation came out that he was the one who handed the emails over to WikiLeaks, and that he was another victim of the so-called Clinton body count. He had nothing to do with the emails. He was a tragic victim of a random mugging gone wrong. And his family has suffered immensely through the years because of these stories. And for more details on Seth Rich, I recommend season 1 of the Conspiracy Land podcast hosted by Michael Isikoff. In late 2016, a man attempted an assault on the PizzaGate restaurant Comet Ping Pong. He came up to DC from North Carolina, and he was going to investigate the pizzeria and free the children that were in the basement. No one was hurt, thankfully. And he was shocked to discover that there was no basement, and the only kids there were eating with their parents. And this attack on Comet Ping Pong was carried out in part because of this man who endlessly promoted it as a fact. So right about now, you're probably asking yourself, has the world gone crazy? And the answer is yes. Yes, it has. In 2018, Q migrated to 8chan, now 8kun. Navigating Chan message boards is typically for more savvy internet users. Unfortunately, some of those users started reposting Q posts on the more accessible social media platforms. And these platforms played what some view as an unforgivable role in the proliferation of PizzaGate, QAnon, COVID denialism, and WayfairGate. YouTube algorithms ended up aiding this distribution of disinformation. The algorithms would suggest more and more extreme videos, and the automatic play next feature didn't give viewers a fair opportunity to walk away in time. And here is some information from the Pew Research Center. 11 of the channels studied for their survey produced 80% of the videos mentioning QAnon. And those would be your influencers and your grifters like our pal Joe M. And QAnon first found its way into the mainstream July 2018 at a midterm election rally that Trump held in Tampa. And why at a Trump rally? In the Quniverse, Trump is the ultimate hero, the man who will save the children and ultimately the world from these evil Satanists. Early boosters of QAnon include Sean Hannity, Roseanne Barr, and of course, Alex Jones, who made claims that he was in direct contact with Q. And meanwhile, there was an actual pedophile and hebephile sex trafficking scandal going on. And oddly enough, this garnered very little attention in Q world. Only 37 of these posts mention Epstein. And the first Q post about Epstein was in 2017. And as you can see, I highlighted the post also references Rothschild, Soros, bloodlines, I have Providence, Satan, and Putin. And it's noteworthy to take notice of the fact that in reference to Epstein Island, they're asking how many levels might exist below. This is in reference to their obsession with underground tunnels or underground bases. And the truth is, Epstein did all of his dirty work right out in the open, right up in the sunshine. He did not need an underground tunnel. So things really began amping up in 2020 when the pandemic lockdowns led to more people being stuck at home. They had more time on their hands. There was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion. So more people were getting red-pilled. But QAnon also jumped on the pandemic and adopted it into their narrative. COVID was a hoax and it was a plandemic. It was a cover story meant to keep people at home so the mole children could be freed and mass arrests could be made. And here we have some tweets from QAnon celebrity Vincent Fusca about the mole children. And I believe this picture was from New York City. Those are overflow tents for COVID patients. And QAnon saw this as they're freeing the mole children. And the interesting thing about Fusca is he has a horse in this race because the QAnon people, some of them believe that JFK Jr. is alive and that Vincent Fusca is JFK Jr. And he's also known for his fancy Trump van, and this is an actual shot from the movie Borat 2, right outside the CPAC. So Vincent Fusca was there during the filming of Borat. So with more people at home, with little to do and lots of confusion, a lot of them found themselves kind of sucked into a rabbit hole of various online thoughts and theories and videos. And this is one of the biggest QAnon ones. And as QAnon began to stretch its slimy tentacles outward, it eventually found common ground with and brought into the fold white supremacists, anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, and even formally leftist New Age woo followers, all of whom started to worship Trump as the hero. Social media platforms did very little to dissuade the spread of misinformation until it was too late. Trying to get misleading posts taken off of Facebook and Twitter was a Sisyphean task, but myself and others would do this, repeatedly reporting misinformation to Facebook to get posts taken down. It usually did not work. No sympathy for the devil, Satanic Panic as a prelude to QAnon. So QAnon is already using a thinly disguised version of the Blood Libel, but they're also mixing in some Satanic Panic. And Satanic Panic emerged in the late 70s and continued through the 90s. The biggest upswing for Satanic Panic was the 1980 book Michelle Remembers. The book has long since been discredited. And talk show hosts like Phil Donahue and Geraldo Rivera sensationalized the emerging trend of Satanic Panic and satanic ritual abuse. The crazier the story, the bigger their viewership was. And one of the earliest precursors to QAnon theory was the disappearance of Johnny Gosch in 1982. He disappeared on his Sunday morning paper route. He was seen talking to a stranger, and it is believed that the man snatched him, pulled him into the car, and the car drove off. He was never seen again. In 1989, 7 years after he disappeared, a young man named Paul Bonacci came forward, alleging that he had helped abduct Johnny and was part of the same sex trafficking ring as him. And about 10 years later, in 1997, Johnny's mom claims that at like 3 in the morning, a young man visited her and showed her scars indicating that he was her son, and told her a wild story about a pedophilia sex trafficking ring. No one else was present for this visit, and some speculate that Gosch's mom was coming up with this story in order to keep interest in her son's case alive. Bonacci was also making accusations against the head of the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha. He claimed that the head of the credit union was part of this ring, and Bonacci also pointed fingers at other high-ranking businessmen and politicians. The credit union was shut down and the head was imprisoned, but not for the crimes alleged by Bonacci. There may have been some kind of sex scandal related to the credit union, but then they had to go and throw Satanism into the mix. And that kind of removes all the nuggets of truth that may have been there. So by the mid-'80s, Satanic Panic was in full swing. More women were entering the workforce and using daycare centers and babysitters. Simple diaper rashes and other common childhood afflictions were seen by some parents as signs of sex abuse. Social workers and police were woefully unprepared to interview these children. And the most notorious of these accusations centered around the McMartin Preschool in California. It was the longest and costliest criminal trial in the history of America. No one was ever convicted for sexual abuse related charges. There were stories about secret underground tunnels, hot air balloons, children being flushed down toilets and emerging into a room on the other end of the toilet. And some children also claimed that Chuck Norris was abusing them. Somehow all of this still allowed for the trial to go on. And a similar event occurred in 1992 in Martinsville, Saskatchewan in Canada. And it's covered in length in the CBC podcast series Uncover, season 6. In 1994 in West Memphis, Arkansas, 3 teenagers were convicted of the 1993 so-called satanic ritual slaying of 3 young boys. The 3 men spent 18 years in prison, one on death row, before being released with an Alford plea in 2011. Damien, Jesse, and Jason might not have ever been freed if not for the 3 Paradise Lost HBO documentary films. The murders of the 3 young boys, Stevie Branch, Chris Byers, and James Michael Moore, were considered officially solved, but many are seeking for the case to be reopened. And subsequent investigations, remember, we had 18 years for people trying to get these young men out of prison. A lot of these investigations have repeatedly demonstrated over and over and over again that the claims of satanic sacrifice are unwarranted. So QAnon is basically an a la carte conspiracy. At its foundation, we have the Blood Libel and Satanic Panic. But then you can kind of pick and choose what you want. Maybe you want a little bit of this, maybe you want a little bit of that. Any narrative can be molded into the QAnon world. And that's kind of what makes it so dangerous, is that there's no set canonized belief system. You can talk to 3 different QAnon followers, and all 3 of them have a different belief. And almost every conceivable conspiracy theory can be molded into the QAnon narrative. And this is actually an old Facebook post I made, just demonstrating how everything is just wrapped up. Conspiracy theories used to be simple. Now with QAnon, it's literally, there's so much to it, so many layers and so many things that are involved with it. And so there are real world consequences of fake conspiracy theories. QAnon researchers have been warning for years that we would be seeing QAnon crimes. Neely Petrie Blanchard of Florida was arrested in November for the shooting death of a sovereign citizen lawyer who was trying to help her get her kids back. And Chris Hallett, who she's accused of killing, was a lawyer that ran a business called E-Clause Loss Prevention. And sovereign citizens kind of believe in this weird fake idea that no one has to pay taxes, and that there are this word salad of like magical words and phrases that you can use to make magical things happen. But it's all bunk. One of their catchphrases is, "I do not consent." So here we have a QAnon mom accused of killing another QAnon follower. June 2018, Matthew Wright blocked the Hoover Dam. He wanted the release of the OIG report. He was convicted of terrorism charges in February of 2020. QAnon follower Cynthia Absug hatched a kidnapping plan to get her child back from a foster home. And she hatched this plan with other QAnon followers. And then we have the big guy, Anthony Camillo, fully red-pilled QAnon follower. He shot and killed Francesco Calli of the Gambino crime family in broad daylight. He showed up at one of his hearings with the words, "Q sent me," on the palm of his hand. He was found mentally unfit to stand trial in June of 2020. And I just put his picture next to Richard Ramirez to kind of make an impact of how creepy the whole thing is that he wrote "Q sent me" on his hand. Election day, Philadelphia. Joshua Messias, Antonio Lamada were arrested outside of the convention center. Both had handguns. One didn't have a license for the gun and was arrested. The other one had a license for Virginia, which isn't recognized in Pennsylvania. So just a quick thing, remember these two names because we are not done with these two guys yet. So December 8th was the last post by Q. YouTube link for "We're not going to take it," with the video content no longer available. So now all these people hooked on this drug couldn't get their drug anymore. Q had ducked out, and in the meantime, Trump lost the election, despite what he was saying. So this was very, very volatile. And despite all of the evidence that already pointed to the inherent dangers of QAnon, no one seemed ready to take it seriously. And then this happened. On January 6th, I had actually slept late that day, and I woke up to pictures of Jake Angeli, the Q shaman, all over my Twitter and Facebook feed. Everybody saying, "Who is this guy? Who is this guy?" I knew right away who he was. He had actually been interviewed several times by the hosts of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, which I also highly recommend. And now remember our two friends from Philadelphia, Messias and Lamada. They were out on bail from their election night arrest and attended the insurrection and were rearrested. And so after January 6th, the real digital soldiers were hard at work attempting to identify the insurrectionists. Some of them are hacktivists, lawyers, independent journalists, a whole bunch of people, and they've actually been helping the FBI identify these people so that they can be arrested. And kind of an example of what these online researchers do would be the Netflix documentary, "Don't F with Cats." It's very sad that it took a historic crisis of an insurrection attempt to get people to listen. And January 6th was a pretty traumatic day for everyone. And thankfully, the internet kind of balanced that with some dark humor that made relevant points about the insurrection. And here are my 4 favorite ones. We have Star Trek, Princess Bride, the most hilarious tweet I've ever seen, and Sad Pence. Since we're talking about January 6th, I have to make mention about Eugene Goodman, the true hero and the true patriot of that day. So on January 6th, the QAnon body count was 5. The day after, a police officer took his life. And then it was reported on January 27th, another police officer took his life. So the QAnon body count from January 6th is up to 7 people now. And the number of suspects who are being identified is growing daily. And January 6th was proof that QAnon was no longer happy to just sit back behind their keyboards and hold their Bibles and pray. They were ready to take up arms and go all in. And Ashley Babbitt was a QAnon follower. She was shot in the neck and killed inside the Capitol building. And here we have a post writing her off as an Antifa spy. And then another post, the Boogaloo Intel drop, venerating her. So, and a similar thing had happened with Jake Angeli. So, as a former 9/11 truther, I have to say it gives me great pleasure to introduce this next part, January 6th, an inside job. Please note the question mark on the end. So some evidence has come to light that may indicate that there was quite literally inside help for the Capitol insurrection. Lauren Boebert, a representative from Colorado, is the one many are pointing fingers at. She was live tweeting the position of Pelosi inside the Capitol. And the day before, another representative reported that he had seen her giving a tour in the Capitol to a bunch of Trump supporters. And other tweets Boebert made before January 6th call into question if she had played a role. The next 48 hours are going to be wild, I think was one of them. And today is 1776. And then the day before, she tweeted about bringing her gun to work with her on the 6th. Now, we don't have 100% conclusive evidence yet of specific involvement by anyone. But we do know for a fact that Trump's speech did play a big role, and little bits and pieces are falling into place that make things look really bad. Now, it says here, there's no indication that Charles Flynn agrees with his brother. So that I do want to stress. And the Pentagon restricted the commander of the DC Guard ahead of the Capitol riot. Basically, his hands were tied and he was unable to help get more troops out when the Capitol Police called him. And like I said, evidence is still being collected. So when I say inside job, please note the question mark. And what's the truth? Q is not real. QAnon conspiracy is not real. And just because these rumors of satanic pedophile cannibals have endured throughout the millennia does not make it a fact. It's a classic method used for demonizing enemies and outsiders. And Satanism, as defined by Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan and author of the Satanic Bible, Satanism is not about sacrifices. They do not even acknowledge or worship the devil, and they do not acknowledge or worship God. Basically, Satanism is just fancy atheism with some kinky sexuality and a little bit of artistic ritualism thrown in. And So the truth behind conspiracy theories is that they distract us from what's really going on in the world. People get so obsessed with these theories that they can't see what's really going on around them. They're not going to dedicate themselves to taking up a cause for truth or justice or freedom. They're so enmeshed in these theories that they're just basically playing Dungeons and Dragons and fighting against imaginary monsters. And the other sad part about conspiracy theories is that almost every conspiracy theory has a tiny, tiny, tiny little itty bitty nugget of truth to it. What happens is everything gets overblown, and then that tiny little nugget of truth gets hidden and buried, and nobody knows what actually is up or what's down. An example of this, Alex Jones's gay frogs. There really was a chemical spill that caused frogs to change sex. It altered them genetically. It did not make them gay. So that would be an actual example of how these conspiracy theories get blown up and actually distract people. So QAnon and Biden, best friends forever. So Biden winning the election, there was still a lot of, nope, not going to happen, not going to happen, not going to happen. And it kept increasing. And then even on Inauguration Day, they were still doubling down, still moving the goalpost, as the tweet says at the bottom. And now one of the new theories is that Trump is going to be actually inaugurated in March. And let's see what happens when that day rolls around and nothing happens. So the aftermath of January 6th and Biden's inauguration really caused a rift of confusion in the QAnon community. Some were ready to come to grips with the fact that they had been lied to. And the best way to sum this up is from Johnny Lydon's quote at the last Sex Pistols show in 1978. He ended the show saying, "Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?" So some QAnon followers are definitely coming to grips with that. And the rest of them are unable to admit they were lied to or that they were wrong, or some stand to make money off of it. So they're unwilling to leave just yet. And we can't mention the inauguration without our buddy Bernie. I just had to throw that in there because it's just the best thing ever. And so a lot of QAnon followers aren't ready to leave their cult behind, despite well-intentioned offers to help them. Some are just too deep down in the rabbit hole and not ready to let go yet. And here's just a few clips from an article. It's done and we were played. This is a very difficult day. Today's inauguration makes no sense. So they're coming to a harsh reality, and it's a very unpleasant one. So too little, too late, too bad. Social media crackdown on January 6th was a huge one, but there were others before that. And the January 6th crackdown demonstrated, without a doubt, that social media platforms were capable of putting a stop to this dangerous ideology. They could have and should have done it years ago. There may have, how many people would still be alive? All the people at the Capitol would probably still be alive. And there have been suicides and just people losing their jobs, divorces. If social media had cracked down earlier, a lot less people would be red-pilled, a lot less lives lost or ruined. They could have done it and they should have done it. And let's not forget about Facebook's role in the Myanmar genocide. And you're fine knowing that. Just don't post that on Facebook. They'll delete your entire account. So will the social media platform companies have to answer for this? They might. Will anything come out of it? I'm a bit pessimistic. It'll just be Facebook coming out saying, we're going to do better, like they always do. And they never really do. And it's kind of interesting to note the top message from Twitter, July 22nd, 2020, that they were taking further action on QAnon. Yet, only about 6 months later, there were still 70,000 QAnon accounts that were purged. And I have to be fair, a lot of the accounts that got wrapped up in that, they were actually anti-QAnon accounts, which were then later restored. So this big ban hammer and purge led to proliferation of cries from conservatives about free speech. And it's actually on both sides. It's not just conservatives. There's a lot of lefties that are getting banned and thrown offline too. And the whole free speech phrase has kind of been taken up by right-wing extremists nowadays. So a lot of times when I hear someone talking about free speech, to me, what I'm hearing is, I'm so angry that they don't let me wear my swastika armband to work. So Q predictions. Some of them came true, but not in the way that they planned. The prediction, the Democrats went to take your guns. Well, if you were there on January 6th and you're getting felony charges, you can't have a gun. The government is following your every move. Yes, yes, they are. If you were an insurrectionist, yes, they are. And the storm, if this isn't the storm, I don't know what is. Mass arrests and unsealed indictments have always been another big QAnon prediction, and there have been. And that leads us to, who is Q? Q has not been officially unmasked. We have not seen the face of Q yet with the proper evidence to back it up. We have a very solid idea of who Q was, and it's believed that this man, Paul Ferber, was the first incarnation of Q. And this was covered in the Q Clearance podcast, which is dedicated to discovering the identity of Q. Whether or not Ferber was posting as Q, he was certainly one of the first people who was pushing the concept on more common social media platforms. Q definitely was two people. Machine learning stylometry shows that there were two different people. And right around the time that the first Q stopped posting, there were Q posts that mentioned follow the pen or pens. And that is interesting. And this was also covered in the Q Clearance podcast. It's not a solid piece of evidence, but it's kind of interesting because this man, Jim Watkins, the current owner of 8kun, previously known as 8chan, he has a bizarre, almost fetishistic interest in fountain pens. Watkins, if he is not posting his Q, definitely has a direct line to Q or control over Q's posts. And this information also comes from Frederick Brennan, the original founder of 8chan, who has since dedicated himself to fighting 8kun and QAnon. And you can see on Jim's lapel there, he's got a little Q pin. And you may recognize his son, Ron, from his sad performance as Dominion voting systems expert. because he read a manual one time. Now, what happens if we figure out who Q is? Well, I asked this question to Pascal Brun. He's a criminal defense attorney from Alabama and a friend of mine. I asked him, if we figure out who Q is, could he face charges? And this would be the most likely charge that could be brought against Q. It would all, there are so many thousands of variables that would also go into other charges, but impersonating a federal officer would definitely be one of the foundation charges that they would go with. And it's only a matter of time until we really find out who Q is. And I think that's a very important thing, because someone needs to answer for what has been done. So what comes next? Well, it seems unlikely that QAnon is going to disappear. And even with the rifts that have come up, like right here, we have our Q shaman, Jake Angeli or Chansley, saying that he is willing to testify against Donald Trump at the impeachment trial. So he changed his tune pretty quick. He must not like the organic food he's getting in jail. But since January 6th, there's really been a huge rift in QAnon. Some are, like I said, a lot are leaving, but some are still clinging and hanging on. And a lot of the ones still clinging to it are the influencers who stand to lose money if Q goes away. Some are coming to grips with reality. The rift is noticeable. And one possible new direction for QAnon could be that one of these influencers steps into the void and kind of not says that they are Q, but tries to kind of be like a new mouthpiece for Q. And who knows where it would go from that point. And there is a possibility they're thinking that, you know, a new religion could arise from the ashes of QAnon. That could kind of be dangerous, you know. And meanwhile, a lot of Republicans are really freaked out about that affiliation. And it's a very weird time. And the best way to really say what comes next for QAnon, the best way to answer that is, it's such an open-ended question. It's almost like a Q drop itself. It's open to so much interpretation, and so much is happening day to day. Just so much new stuff is coming out that it could take a 360-degree turn. It could take a sharp turn. It could just spin around. It could spin out of control. Something new could come along, but it probably is not going to go away anytime soon. And that's unfortunate. But now we do have a better visibility of QAnon, and we can kind of see it's gonna be a bumpy ride, but it's gonna be one we all kind of have to take together and just kind of see where it goes from there. And let's hope it has a happy ending, or at least happier. So so that is QAnon, Blood Libel for the digital age. And I'm not sure how are we with time?
Hey, Steph, we're right up on the hour.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Do not apologize for sharing information that everybody showed up here to listen to. I thank you. And yes, everyone do listen to the podcast. Even the podcast is afraid. But Steph, I want to thank you. And even though we're hard at the hour, I still want to take a quick 5 minutes, if you're okay.
Yeah.
With that, because we do have some great questions and to the not of you that came to hear it. And Steph, I thank you for right up front drawing the distinction between conspiracy versus conspiracy theory, and reminding me of the McMartin case. I mean, this is history repeating itself. I don't remember the Chuck Norris part, though. I mean, I remember some of his films are difficult to watch. I wouldn't say they're necessarily abusive, but yeah, we do have some questions here. I won't even bother with mine. I want to get to folks who showed up here to see and support you. And let's see. Okay, and this is from your friend Doug. My scrolling happened to get right to him. Do you know of anyone successfully infiltrating and trolling QAnon? And I could say it's not Black Lives Matter. That's my part. But Steph, do you know of anyone who's been able to do that?
Some of my Twitter friends have kind of infiltrated some of their. I can't really talk about it too much because it's like a secret troll operation. But yeah, they have been able to infiltrate and kind of like walk among them and kind of get some reactions and start some meme wars with them and stuff.
Yeah, the meme wars. I'm flabbergasted, but okay. And I'm gonna answer this myself from Elaine. Why the name Q? Is it from the Star Trek character? Absolutely not, my dear. No, not at all. You mentioned this, and I had a question too, and so does Forrest. Can you please explain the Pepe thing? Because clearly this is not Pepe Le Pew. This is a different Pepe entirely.
Yeah, that's Pepe the Frog. It was actually started by a cartoonist. I'm trying to recall the one episode of QAnon Anonymous. They talk about this. It was done by a cartoonist. It was supposed to be apolitical, but then somehow it got pulled onto the Chan message boards, and now Pepe has become like this trope for like racists, like Richard Spence, the guy that got punched, the alt-right guy that got punched live on camera. He was showing off a little Pepe pin too. So the alt-right and QAnon has kind of adopted Pepe, even though he was not political when the cartoon started.
Thank you. I had a couple of people ask this question, so I'll try to aggregate it as best I can. How do you talk to someone, a friend, a family member who is clearly, wrapped up in the Q-verse? How do you talk to them?
I think the best thing is the okay and method. When they tell you their crazy idea, you just kind of, you don't look at it as crazy, just okay, and then that encourages them to complete that sentence and to say more. And it's a kind of a Socratic method where hopefully they get to the point where they paint themselves into a corner, or it makes them kind of snap out of the thought stopping, and maybe they're able to kind of start questioning their inner monologue a little bit more. And if someone has a friend or a family member that isn't a QAnon, I would kind of point them towards the QAnon Anonymous podcast. They might think that it's pro-Q, but it really isn't. But you can kind of hook them in thinking it is pro-Q. And the subreddit QAnon Casualties is another good one. A lot of people will post on there, and a lot of people have gotten help through there.
Again, I had a couple of people who asked this question. Great minds think alike. Thank you, Russ Dobler. And thank you, friend of the show, Neil Tyson. I almost didn't want to tell you because I know how nervous you were at the beginning, but you should also know.
Oh, that just made my day.
This is valuable, didn't it?
Yes.
Well, honey, take it. Let it ride on it for the whole week. Why not?
I will.
But they both kind of want to know, like, what can we learn from your conversion, like from being a 9/11 truther, and how you got out, and can that apply to sort of helping others escape their belief systems?
It takes, everyone has a different way out of the rabbit hole, and it takes it's just, what it takes is this moment of harsh realization and it's painful and gut-wrenching and your heart breaks, but you just have this moment where something, it could be anything that makes you realize I was wrong. And then it kind of all falls into place from there. For me, it was something that a friend told me, and that just made my house of cards fall. For Jatarth, who was just on Anderson Cooper, for him, it was he realized that Trump always made references to tippy top, and that just because Q predicted he would say that, but Trump always says that. And that's what got him out. And for each person, it's a different thing. It's like a different journey. Like, you know, you have to throw the ring into Mordor, into into the, you know, but each person has a different golem, and each person has a different Sam. So it's a very like introspective like journey that you have to go on, and it's a little painful, but it's definitely worth it.
Wow, it actually sounds a lot painful, given how we know the brain works. Stephanie, I wanna thank you. I wish we had another whole.
I'm so sorry.
What did I say? Stop apologizing. You gave the information that we wanted to know. I really wish we had more time for some of these questions. But Doug Stanhope, thank you for bringing it around. You asked a very, very good question, and we'll end on this, that he was under the impression that there would be cocktails, and is that for the after party? And if you don't mind, Stephanie, I'll take that one. Doug, yeah. You were supposed to get your drink tickets emailed to you, and you take them to your in-house, literally your own house bartender. So if you didn't get that, let us know and we'll fix it for next time. But Stephanie, I do want to thank you for sharing your knowledge, hard won and hard research knowledge in this area. And to all of you watching, I want to remind you that if you missed any of this talk, it is being recorded and will be available tomorrow on skepticalenquirer.org. And our next guest in this series will be here on February 19th. That's when we'll be welcoming Michael Mann, who will talk about the new climate war and the fight to take back our planet. And my thanks to you, the audience, over at one point, 800 of you. Thank you so much. Of course, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, CFI, and the tech team made up of the amazing Mark. And my name is Leanne Lord, and thank you for joining us. Good night.